our first panel, and this is a really esteemed panel. First panel is titled Nevada Path to Carbon Reduction, Making Clean Energy and Transportation Pillars of our economy. And I'm pleased to introduce my friend, John Ralston. Now, I'm supposed to kind of do a bio on him, but raise your hand if you have not heard of John Ralston. See me afterwards, and I'll give you the little Cliff Notes version on him. So John is a friend, and we were just chatting this week. I met with John, and we're laughing because one thing that we have in common is we both came here I came in '89, he came in '84. But one of the things we joke about is that we never really meant to stay. We both came here, we're like, 2-year internship, and I'm out of here. 2-year internship, and I am going to move to Utopia, USA. And it takes a few years. You keep trying to go, but there is something about this state, right? There's this sense of opportunity and optimism. Even through the recession, we still feel like we can reinvent ourselves and build ourselves again. So 30 some odd years later, we are both still here. So he knows the state well, knows the conversation well, knows the politics well, so please come on up. John, and while you're walking up, I'm going to tell people who's going to be on your panel. We're going to have Nevada Senator Chris Brooks. Chris, you've been an amazing champion. We're going to have County Commissioner Justin Jones, another amazing champion. Justin, we're going to have Dave Bobzien, who is the Director of the Nevada Governor's Office of Energy. Dave. And we're going to have Ann Pongracz, who is the Chairwoman of the Nevada Public Utilities Commission. So Ann, all right, turning it over to you. Come on up, panelists. Turning it over to you, John.
I'm going to sit here. Is that all right?
Apparently it is.
Yeah, okay.
Apparently.
Hi, everybody. I didn't turn around to see who didn't raise their hands or did raise their hand. No, I saw the governor raise his hand, so he'll hear from me later. So let me just say that, and this really is the truth. I am honored to be here to moderate this panel. This is really an all-star panel that Tina has assembled, and I'm sure she spent as much time on the phone begging them as she did with me. So what I really want to do is today, and we talked about this previously on a call that everyone except Bobzien was on because he was off doing some, whatever. I want to talk about the central questions, which is where we were, where we are, and where we're going when it comes to renewable energy. You've heard the governor and Andy gush about how much was achieved in the legislature. The governor does a lot of gushing about what was achieved in the legislature, which we take with a grain of salt, but I want to get now to what really did happen in the legislature and where we're going in the future, and whether NV Energy is a hero or a villain in this story, which I think is actually quite obvious, but we'll get to that in a moment. Let me start with Senator Brooks, who many of you know has been involved in this issue for many years, both on the private side and the public side. Give us a short a distillation as you can, Senator, about where we were, maybe even just a decade ago, where you think we are now, and where you think we still need to go.
Thank you, John. So short will be difficult, but I will try.
That's what I'm here for.
So I'm incredibly proud of this state. I'm a native Nevadan and grew up here in Southern Nevada. And in 1997, we were one of 2 states that, the second state in the nation that passed an RPS bill and had an RPS law on the books. That is actually what motivated me to get involved in that and the Western energy crisis are what motivated me to get involved in renewable energy. And so, going back to 97 and 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and then fast forward to where we are today, we have an aggressive RPS. We've met it, and we have a large rooftop solar community and industry, and we have rapidly declining greenhouse gas emissions as a state. And so I'm incredibly proud of it. I put my entire life savings and retirement on the line and started something, and it's paid off, and thousands of jobs later, we are kind of one of the leaders in the nation. And I'd like to remind everyone in this crowd, and not because of any recent events or future events, but during the Great Recession, we had thousands and thousands of construction workers working in renewable energy projects when there was not a lot of other work available. And so that was due to a lot of the leadership of policymakers and business leaders in this room. And so I just think that that's important to recognize that it is a job-creating tool for the state of Nevada, as well as a carbon reduction tool for the state of Nevada. We import $12 billion worth of, or $9 billion worth of fossil fuels into our state. What could we be doing with $9 billion as a state in our economy if we weren't importing those, mostly for vehicles and energy production?
So before I turn it over to somebody else, where are we still? If the phrase is not falling down, where is there an opportunity for the state to do more than it already is?
Well, I think that I'm so glad that RTC put this together, and we're having a conversation about transportation electrification, because that's the next goal. The RPS is a floor, not a ceiling, and we should build as much renewables and storage as we possibly can immediately. And that is for the electricity sector. But where we really have an opportunity as a state that isn't producing oil and gas, but is producing solar electricity and geothermal and wind electricity, the electrification of transportation is the next horizon, and is in my opinion, the low-hanging fruit from a carbon standpoint and for the building of an economy.
Okay, I think I should have mentioned at the beginning, and I'm not sure how we're doing this, Tina, but I do believe there are cards if people want to ask questions. We're going to make this interactive with the audience, and everybody but Tony Sanchez is allowed to fill out one of those cards. Is the rule here. So let me turn over to Ann for a second. Yes, I know you look shocked. There's plenty of time for these politicians to talk. I want to actually get to the substance. So. This has been a real challenge for regulators for a variety of different reasons, including the rapidly changing environment, so to speak, the pun referring to both the changing clean energy, the politics behind it, the pressures on the regulators, the legislative changes that have occurred. I guess what I wonder, and what I think a lot of people here wonder about is, the regulators are supposed to make it better for regular folks, right? You're supposed to be looking out for us. So how do you balance between being a governor on what's happening and loosening the regulatory strings so that people can do what they need to do to make renewable energy work?
That is the challenge, isn't it? Well, there's two areas where two main ways we do that. One is by working with utility resource planning and rate cases. So one of the major jobs of the commission is to make determinations about where we have to balance. We have to balance the interests of shareholders and the interests of ratepayers. And so every time the legislature comes in and changes our mandate appropriately and says it's appropriate now in the state of Nevada to focus more clearly, more specifically on achieving goal X, then it's up to the commission to figure out how to make that happen. And so if we're working in the utility arena. So the legislature makes policy, and in a lot of ways, it's up to the commission to figure out different ways to implement it. It's the commission in some ways where the rubber hits the road. And so, for example, we have the EV legislation from last session, we have community solar. Those now have become dockets at the commission. And we have to figure out how to make those things come to life. And so we do that through a process called rulemaking. And it sounds really, really dry. But I can tell you it can be fascinating. And one of the reasons I was really glad to be invited to speak today is because I want to encourage people to come and participate in our workshops that we're going to be having. And we're going to be having these in the very near future, towards the end of September. If you're interested, go on our website, get on our master service list, you'll get all the announcements, and come on in and talk to us. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to have a PhD to be effective in a PUC rulemaking docket. You do have to know what you're talking about, and you do have to have specific interests that you want to advocate for. So, and you have to be able to understand, you know, the Nevada way of doing things. I think our legislature did a notably good job of this session, which is know how to disagree without being disagreeable. Come well prepared, come prepared to negotiate, and come really prepared to try to get results. The way you get results is you actually have to get down into the nitty-gritty of discussing ideas and get your fingerprints on the drafts of the legislation
Well, I grant you that
and the regulations.
While I grant you that PUC rulemaking dockets are the sexiest topic I can imagine to continue to talk about, I do want to ask you one other question before we pass the microphone, and that is, again, this tug of war. And the rooftop solar debate was a classic example of this. Is it the legislature setting the policy and then you're implementing it, or is it the PUC going too far and setting policy on its own by its decisions? By the very decisions you make, you are kind of de facto setting policy, right? So that's a difficult line to balance too, right?
Actually, if we really understand what our job is to implement the goals that are set by the legislature. Now, certainly, if we choose a certain path to implementation, that may favor certain types of folks more than other types of folks, or certain kinds of companies versus other kinds of companies. But that's why participation is so important, because we need to be hearing from the full spectrum of interested folks.
Commissioner, you, as David Bobzien, have looked at this from different perspectives. You've been in the legislature. You're at local government now. What do you think, from what you learned at the state level, what is local government's role in furthering these kinds of policies?
I think local government has a huge role to play in that. Obviously, we're here at the invitation of the RTC to talk about transportation and clean energy, but I think the local governments have a great role to play. I'm going to do something that is pretty unusual. I'm going to, at Clark County, I'm going to praise the cities for the work that they have done when it comes to sustainability.
Is someone taping this?
No, I mean, seriously, the city of Las Vegas and the city of Henderson in particular have really taken leadership roles when it comes to clean energy, sustainability. There are some fantastic folks that had visions years ago on those issues. And I have learned that the Clark County has a long ways to go simply to bring itself up to the same level as some of our sister jurisdictions. Clark County is the largest municipality. Unincorporated Clark County has more residents than the cities of Las Vegas and Henderson combined, yet we are not at the same level as they are when it comes to electrification, conversion to LED lighting for streetlights, for our complete streets policies, and some of the other efforts that the cities have done. And so I'm looking forward to an opportunity. I've already sort of warned my colleagues on the county commission that we're going to have a discussion in the next few weeks on a climate reality plan, a climate action plan. I was at a conference earlier this month. I was there talking to other leaders. The city of Reno announced their climate reality or climate action plan. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to get in with other leaders. I was talking to Mayor March right before this about this issue of really having Southern Nevada take a step forward in addressing climate change, because it's here, whether we like it or not.
Did you fly on Al Gore's private jet that uses all that fossil fuel or not?
I did not fly on his private jet, no. And I did not ride my bike here today. I know it prior. I would love to say that I rode the bus here today, but unfortunately we don't have bus service out to my area of town. But I'm excited to be working on that with the RTC.
As Tina Quigley's board begins to meet to think about the dismissal process. So, Mr. Bobzien, you've served in the legislature, I believe.
Guilty.
You were in local government for a cup of coffee, I believe, and then you left for the governor's office of energy. Now, I think there may be some people in this audience who are asking themselves this question: what in the world does the governor's office of energy do?
This is fantastic because, of course, you're grilling me in front of my boss, so I want you to know that this is an even better experience. The Governor's Office of Energy, we are small but mighty, but we really see ourselves as central to a lot of the conversations that we're hearing and we're having today. For instance, Ann talks about just how interesting PUC dockets are. Well, our office participates in what's known as the International Energy Conservation Code. So you think PUC dockets are dry, we work on those issues. But even in that space, what we're seeing is a focus on electrification, transportation electrification, and all these new emerging technologies and where they fit. So that's one example of what the Governor's Office of Energy does. But what I will say, and I think is an appropriate frame for our discussion today, the governor mentioned the fact that we're a member of the Climate Alliance, and that is a pledge. It's a pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's also a network, a very active network, and his administration is active in that with other states that are working on these issues and problems. And there's this idea of climate federalism, and when I think what you have up here right now is a perfect example of that. Because we have such retrenchment and inaction at the federal level, there's this pent-up demand to look at these solutions and policies, and it's going to be incumbent upon state governments, local governments working together to figure out a lot of stuff, because if the dam breaks in the next year or so, and there's a national climate discussion about how we deal with this and how we support the innovations and the technologies and the shift in the economy that's going to have to happen, it's going to be so many of the ideas that happen here because of this convening by RTC and in these other forums that's going to really, you're going to see these ideas get talked about and hopefully acted upon at the national level.
Hey, John, I wanted to add something to what David's saying here. We just recently executed a memorandum of understanding with the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. So 4 public utilities commissions now are joining together to really identify how we can support utility best practices to take action in support of the numerous areas where we need to take more dramatic action to address climate change. And best practices is a big part of this. If we're going to crack this nut, we need to be able to do it better, faster, cheaper, and we need to figure out what the best practices are and take those ideas from wherever we can get them. And so one of the things we're trying to do as a commission is get smarter about working with our colleagues with other commissions around the West and the 12-state Western region to see what do they know that we don't know. And I think that's also true for our utilities. They're doing more outreach with their colleagues. And that's a crucial piece of this puzzle. We're not going to be able to do this just with our own ideas.
I'd like Senator Brooks and Commissioner Jones to address this point, and David Bobzien alluded to this. There's a national piece to this. There's a lot of interlocking local and state pieces, but unless the debate is changed or moved forward at a national level, it's going to make moving forward that more difficult. Now, most people with triple-digit IQs are not climate deniers, right, anymore. That seems to be on the fringe unless you walk up to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So, how does this become less partisan? I mean, you saw Republicans come to the table in Carson City on RPS maybe, but that was only after a ballot question passed overwhelmingly, right, without much opposition. As long as, and there are a lot of Republicans who are not climate deniers, but see a path forward with different methods than some of you might advocate. Is that where we are now, Senator? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's just 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I think it's 301 East Carson has some of that problem as well. So we had an RPS bill that, after a lot of work, a ballot initiative, and a failed attempt that we had and that I led in 2017 session to pass expanded RPS, we had a bipartisan, unanimous vote to pass it. That did not come easy. But in the same session, we had a carbon reduction bill that did not grant any additional powers to any agencies of the state. It just set a mandate to get to a certain place. And there was one party in Carson City that voted unanimously to support that. And there was another party in Carson City, both houses, who we did not pick up a single vote. So it's difficult because I have a lot of Republican friends and I have a lot of Democratic friends. And when I talk to all of them, they all understand that this climate crisis is real, and they all understand that we need to reduce our greenhouse gases. And one of the arguments we hear from those who fail to support this is like, well, what can Nevada do? This is a global issue. Well, Governor Sisolak just talked about, and Director Bobzien just talked about, the Climate Alliance. Half of the economy of the United States of America is part of the Climate Alliance. The United States is the biggest economy on the planet. If we're talking about half of the biggest economy on the planet is motivated to do this thing, then we can make a difference at a state level. And so I urge my colleagues in the other party to come and join us in implementing these issues that will help and build our economy. All we need to do is look at is track record. The technology exists. We don't need to invent a single thing. The pricing is right. It doesn't need to get any cheaper to be cost effective. We just need bold policymakers making fact-based, intelligent decisions.
And now we are going to adjourn the meeting of the Chris Brooks Fan Club. Okay.
You want to
I
chime in?
want Commissioner Jones to address this. And from this standpoint, though, you have been involved for years in another issue, very contentious partisan issue, in which the polling would seem to favor your side, background checks. And yet it seems almost intractable in Washington, D.C., as does to some extent some of the renewable energy, clean energy kinds of things in D.C. How do you break through that? What is the reality in terms of you're going to eventually need Republicans on board? Is it going to take going to the ballot on a variety of different things and showing that the public will is behind some of these things, or is there another way?
I think definitely that's part of it, but I will say that the one thing that is different between the issue of guns and the issue of climate change is the cost curve. I think Chris talked about this a little bit. 6 years ago when I was up at the legislature, NV Energy fought kind of against what we were trying to do in terms of pushing clean energy. But the reality is, in a period of 6 years, the cost curve for solar and wind has come down so dramatically that it is economically, not just economically viable, but necessary to move to renewable sources. Wind energy is now the cheapest way to produce energy. That wasn't the case 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And solar is going to be the second cheapest form of energy here in a very short period of time. And so when you talk about how do we get people from other parties involved, I think we have to show them that it's economically required that they get involved in clean energy. And the converse of that is, of course, that climate change costs billions and billions of dollars a year. And so when we incorporate those costs into how we go about decision making, then I think it again requires that everyone get on board. Whether they believe it or not, it's in our face. We see here, I live at Mountain's Edge, and 2 weeks ago, we had a microburst of 3 inches of rain, which is a really boring thing to talk about, unless you happen to have lived in the dozens of homes that were damaged as a result of this microburst that caused a dam break. And so those types of costs will be in our face, whether we are Democrats or Republicans.
I'm not gonna force Ann to get into the partisan fray here, and which you will thank me forever. But
Thank you.
Director Bobzien, that's him. Is that what we have to call him now? Director? Oh my God. What about that? You've been in the partisan hurly-burly a few times in your life. I mean, how do you get beyond that?
Well, Chris's point about the carbon bill, I think, was very important, and senators that needs to be congratulated for that, because that was really, I would offer, the biggest story on climate coming out of the last legislative session. The RPS was an amazing victory, and it really charts the course for the future. But the carbon bill kind of sets the stage for this whole conversation about we have to now pivot to transportation electrification, because we have made so much progress decarbonizing the power sector, and we're on a trajectory where that's going to happen. Now we got to get into the really hard stuff in these other sectors, and it's going to be the financial imperative. I mean, we're obviously talking about the benefits, the health benefits, the climate benefits, the clean air benefits, but ultimately the bottom line, I think, is going to drive this. And I tweeted about it this morning, so if you want to read the report, you can find it, but out this month, BNP Paribas, they're like one of the 10 largest banks in the world out of France. They came out with analysis this month that talks about long-term investments, energy investments, and what that means for oil and gas companies and their 20-plus year investment strategy. It now shows that EVs, coupled with renewables like wind and solar, 7 times more advantageous in terms of return on capital investment than oil and gas transportation. You gotta know that the big oil companies are looking at this. They know they have to make that shift because the investments that they're making, they don't want to get caught up short. And so I think for everyone here, we can have the debates, we can be in the session-to-session partisan bickering and everything else, but if we're not careful, we get left behind, Nevada families get left behind, jobs get left behind and left on the table. And so that, I think, is really what's going to drive this at the end of the day, is that economic argument.
How many people in this room follow David Bobzien on Twitter? Oh, come on, you're lying. All right.
I wasn't trying to boost followers, just trying to be helpful with
We
where
have
you can read the report.
We're getting some good questions here, but before I get to the first one by a private citizen by the name of Steve Sisolak, let me just ask Ann one question because I want to jump back in here. And no, please don't talk about rulemaking anymore. I'm talking about all this, and I'm saying I'm going to keep you out of the partisan fray, and you are supposed to be these independent regulators. Once you're appointed, no politician would ever call you to try to influence you. But you don't live in a vacuum. You read about what's going on locally, nationally, internationally, at the state level. Does it affect you?
Well, sure. And one of the hardest parts of being a commissioner is that it is kind of a lonesome job. And it is, not only do we have to limit our contact with the outside world in terms of getting calls from people, but we can't even talk with each other about a lot of stuff. So we do get a lot of information in our proceedings, but we also, like everybody else in this room, live in a soup of information provided through social media, through newspapers, through articles.
Where's the best place to get good information these days online, Ann? Would you say?
Well, there's one Nevada author, who has started with his own outlet, Nevada in
Okay,
something.
you can start talking about rulemaking again if you're going to do that. Let me read this question from private citizen Steve Sisolak, and as usual throughout my career, he has helped me a lot ask good questions. And this is a really good question. Anybody or all of you can jump in on this. What opportunity exists to export some of the clean energy that we produce in Nevada? Who wants to take that one first? You can suck up to the boss first, David. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was actually looking at Ann because this is actually a tag team situation for us where Nevada is a keystone state in terms of geography, in terms of our resource profile, in terms of policy and everything else. And so for instance, the commissioner and I have a conversation about how we, and she alluded to this, how we relate and how we interact with our other Western states. And certainly the investor-owned utility is a big part of this. Our participation in the energy imbalance market, the possibility of us going to a day-ahead market, the trading, the buying and selling of electrons and clean electrons is a rapidly emerging conversation that is going to have a lot of economic benefit to the state, and it's how we interact with those other states is a part of it. I know that the governor's leadership on this issue in forums such as WGA and his conversation with our governor to the west, all of that sets the stage for making sure that the prosperity of the clean energy economy is going to be real and tangible, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the years to come.
Figuring out how to make that work is really complicated because we not only have the need for states to coordinate, but also regional electric markets to coordinate. And these regional electric markets are basically operated by what I just think of loosely as the great computers in the sky. And so when if Nevada wants to effectively market its excess energy into the markets of other states, what we need to do is be very, very careful that as we interact, for example, with our neighbor to the direct west, that we don't get swamped by their needs, either to accept energy from us or to force us to take energy that we may not be able to absorb. One of the oddities about electric markets today is sometimes energy is negatively priced. Energy can be worth less than a cent. So we need to think this thing through very carefully. We also need to, and this is where the utility, our major utility here has a big role in figuring out how do we set ourselves up from an underlying networking perspective. Just like with the railroads, you needed to have the track laid in the right places. With electric companies, you need to have the transmission networks built in the right places. And you need to be able to take into account, for example, where will the growth areas be for demanding the energy we want to provide 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, because once that transmission goes into place, that has a shelf life of 30, 40, 50 years, and it costs billions of dollars. So a lot of piece parts here.
You know, this isn't a new debate, Senator. I remember one of the first interviews I did when Barack Obama was running for president, and that's more than a decade ago now. And we were talking about the economy of Nevada and clean energy, and he said, I was flying in, and I didn't understand. I mean, it's sunny here every day. Why is there not a solar panel on every roof as I'm flying in? And why are you guys not selling all this energy? There is this feeling, I think, that, I mean, it seems like common sense. Ann talks about how complicated maybe it really is, but why have we not built an economy around exporting energy? It's a great question from private citizen Steve Sisolak.
Well, I would say we have, and we have massive solar projects all across southern Nevada that are exporting energy on every minute of every day every time the sun's up to California, and when we also have in place and are about to probably go forward with several other projects that are going to be solely for Nevada, and then with our interactions with California and the regional markets, we are exporting. But I would say that we have a huge opportunity because of a few ingredients. Obviously, our geographical place in the world makes us one of the best solar resources on the planet, period, end of story. And we have massive transmission intersections in southern Nevada where we can tie into the Southwest markets and the California markets. And these are relatively new transmission investments that we've made. We have the only operating lithium mine, which is a huge ingredient for energy storage in the entire country. And for all of these things, and by the way, a highly skilled workforce and a great business and tax climate, we are the epicenter, or should be the epicenter, of renewable energy in the West. And just a few, I think just a few policy tweaks and a few investments from the state, and we would be the leader for exporting renewable energy.
What are those policies that we need to tweak to get there?
Well, I think that we need to do some, as a state, and this, if you think regulatory conversations are wonky and not very sexy, talk about regionalization conversations. And so the Governor's Office of Energy, the Governor's Office, the Public Utilities Commission, and the legislature are kind of having those conversations right now. I'm having those conversations with the California legislature. The commission is having those conversations with the California Commission, and the Governor's Office of Energy and the governor are having those conversations with other governors and other offices of energy about how do we do that regionalization. And both California and their legislature and Nevada, hopefully in our legislature, are going to make some of those governance conversation tweaks where we have a seat at the table and we can enter into agreements. And the utility has already done it. NV Energy is already in the energy imbalance market with the California Independent System Operator.
Go ahead.
There's also the component of private industry and technology. And Chris mentioned battery storage. and all the various forms of storage that are developing right now, whether they're battery-based or hydro-based, or I'm just learning about gravity-based storage options, are going to be a crucial piece of this too. And we may be 3, 4, 5 years out from private industry developing and delivering to the market storage products that are sufficient to really make us effective because what will happen then is all of our solar can be stored, and then it can be delivered at the time that somebody needs it. So there's a technology and business component to this as well.
Commissioner, did you want to address this or not?
Sure. So I think one other thing that needs to be noted is we have hundreds of thousands, millions of people who come here every year to our conventions. And it's an opportunity that when they are here, we need to take them out to our solar plants and show them what we're doing and use it as a marketing tool to let people know what they should be doing when it comes to sustainability and clean energy.
There are a couple other questions here, and I want to get to them, but let's address the elephant in the room. And I'm not making any disparaging comments about Tony, who's a friend of mine. But let's talk about NV Energy for a second. And I really want to have a candid conversation about this because there is a perception, I think, that the utility had to be dragged kicking and screaming into the modern clean energy world. Harry Reid, for a while. Remember him? Was going after NV Energy and saying they have to shut the coal plants down. They're going to shut the coal plants down. He got involved in the legislative process at one time. That's a great story. It'll be in the book, trust me. And now they seem to be have either brought themselves, been dragged into the modern world and are doing some things. Now their view of it would be slightly different than my description. Probably, but let's talk about where the utility was, where it is now, and where you think it should go. Who's going to take that on? Yeah, you got your own panel coming up. Go ahead.
Well, I think that it's important that we realize some of the roles that some of the parties in this conversation have. The legislature has the role of creating policies that represent the will of the people of Nevada. The utility has the role of providing safe, low-cost, reliable energy and providing profits to their shareholders. That's just the business model. And the commission has the role of trying to ensure that the legislature's policies and the utility's business model are the best outcomes for the ratepayer. And so all of those things sometimes conflict. And so I would say that NV Energy and all utilities, most utilities across the country, have realized that these business decisions support renewable energy, and for those reasons, and they are going forward, and in some cases leading the way on procurement and development of renewable energy. And commissions and legislatures are constantly trying to keep up with what our constituents want us to do. And you know, the ratepayer is the constituency of the commission. And so I think that the business case has aligned with the policy positions of the state of Nevada. And so I think we're going to see, hopefully, investor-owned utilities all across the country, and including ours, continue to expand and even lead in this space.
Director, sir?
What the senator said.
Well, I have a slightly different question for you. You're not going to get that lucky.
Okay.
Last cycle, we saw the second iteration of something called Question 3. And, you know, we're going to open our energy markets, and that sounded great. And you know, I think Chris Brooks believed in it before he sold out to NV Energy. So, he did reveal to us on our podcast, I think, that he voted no on that. But seriously, NV Energy spent a lot of money. Some of you may remember. I always said I should have bought a TV station when I got here, and I wouldn't have to be sitting here today, because as much money as was spent last cycle on this thing. But NV Energy's basic pitch was, don't do this. The lights are going to go out. Scare us all to death that it was a bad idea. Did I distill that correctly, Tony?
Risky and costly.
So, I mean, there are people, you know, again, going to common sense, which may not apply to energy policy, which is hopelessly complex. The more players you have, the better for everybody. Is that true? Maybe it's not so obvious.
Well, how did I know that I was going to possibly get this question? I think Senator Brooks's discussion of the roles, I think, was important in, and I'm going to own it, my own opposition to the question was, had it passed, it would have thrown into jeopardy kind of the rules of play and how we do things when it relates to the power sector in Nevada, and the loss of the legislative ability to set policy and direct the future of energy in this state to achieve public policy goals. And that was my main opposition to it. In a lot of ways, the things that we're doing to decarbonize the power sector, this is frankly the easy stuff. And it's the easy stuff because we have this very established, very predictable field in which we operate. We have an investor-owned utility that has its role. We have a legislature that has its role. We have a PUC that has its role. And together, what we've been able to find, because of Senator Brooks' observation that the business case is aligned with the public policy imperative to deal with climate, we're able to make that progress, and we're able to set ourselves in a trajectory of cleaner energy and cleaner and more technology and innovation. And so that's, I think, and I'm sorry, what was your actual question? That was the answer to the question I had formulated in my mind that I was positive you were going to ask me and put me on the spot.
Once a politician, always a politician. That was close enough. Don't worry about it. Either of you want to weigh in on this? Go ahead.
I just want to say, obviously, your prior question was what led us down the path of NV Energy making decisions that it did. Obviously, the cost curve was part of it, but also you saw many of the largest users of power making the decision to pay to exit NV Energy because they wanted to be able to market themselves as obtaining clean energy. A lot of obviously the strip properties, and that obviously played a role in NV Energy's decision to serve the needs of its customers, including its largest customers.
Aren't they now spending money to bribe these folks to stay in? I read that in some.
I can neither
public
confirm nor deny that Clark County has
Yes.
received incentives from NV Energy
Exactly.
to stay.
So let me follow up with you, Commissioner, because this question I think that we got is for someone local, and it essentially goes like this: transportation is the biggest contribution to carbon out there. People don't or can't carpool, but you know what might help? Electric cars. And then this is quite passionately at the end. I can feel it coming off of here. Why not allow electric cars in HOV lanes in Clark County? Look at that. First applause for a question.
The answer is that can certainly happen. That's an NDOT decision. I will just say there's a cautionary note there. You've already seen in other jurisdictions. In fact, I read, I guess, last week, Salt Lake pulled back on allowing electric vehicles in their HOV lanes because everyone in Utah has 7 or more people in their minivans in the carpool lanes. From their decision to allow electric vehicles. And so I would say that is fine for now if we went down that path. However, the reality of it is at some point you may have to pull back.
Anybody else want to talk about electric cars and HOV lanes?
I'll jump on that because I don't have the pleasure of having to deal with this issue directly day in and day out in the Southern Nevada community. The point here is, and we're going to find ourselves 5 years from now on the other end of this hockey stick of EV adoption, where you're going to see tremendous market share achieved by EVs, and at that point, if you have everybody in EVs driving in HOV lanes, you haven't really solved anything. And I think what it points to is that, and this is great for RTC, not only is this a conversation about electrifying every single car that's out there, it's also about dealing with overall the vehicle miles traveled. And so, RTC, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization, you can't just electrify everything. You also have to look at how are we building out? What is the 20-year trajectory for Southern Nevada in terms of density, living choices, commuting choices, And I can say that not having to deal with that directly anymore in local government and the tough decisions that come with that. So that'll be on Commissioner Jones to sort out.
And he did a nice job of punting it, didn't he? We have about 20 minutes left. I think we go to 9:45, right? So we have 9:35? Oh, so she's trying to edit me. Good luck with that. Let me try to get to all these other questions, though. I'm sure Tina will allow me to do that. Energy conservation plays a large role in addressing the climate crisis, and the building sector accounts for 39% of carbon emissions and 55% of global electricity consumption. What is the state doing to reduce energy in state-funded buildings, schools, and university buildings? Who wants to take that one on?
I guess it's on me.
I think it is.
So when I mentioned Senator Brooks's climate bill and why I thought that was the most important thing coming out of the session last time on climate, I will tell you my new reality is no more breaks after legislative sessions. That is the bill that is keeping me up at night and keeping our office staff busy, keeping other agencies in the cabinet that are represented here trying to figure out how we're going to put together an inventory and evaluation of different policies that are going to help us achieve those goals. I am a big believer in you got to eat your own dog food, and you're going to see state agencies and state government have to take some ownership of the built environment, our building portfolio, and set some more aggressive targets for how we're going to achieve energy efficiency and reductions. And so that is a very important question, and it's a big part of this climate puzzle. Like I said, the power sector was easy. Now comes the really difficult work.
All right, 3 questions in 8 minutes. You think we can do it? I think we can, as long as the politicians up here don't talk too much. What policies and regulations can be put in place to advance renewable deployment on rooftops and parking lots? Utility scale is great and needed, but we need to also deploy distributed generation. That would be Chris, I'm being told.
So I think that having, and we tried this and it didn't turn out so well, but having a real conversation about the value of energy, where it's made and when it's made, I think is the best way to really make those determinations. So if there is a value to distributed generation or microgrids or storage, through a rate-making process, really, a mandate from or guidance from the legislature, but through the rate-making process, sending pricing signals to consumers and ratepayers on what is valuable where and when. And we started some of that in 2017 with the Distributed Energy Resources Integrated Resource Planning, which is just some wonky stuff. But what it does is it within the integrated resource planning process says, what is the value of putting this solar on this roof here based upon where we are in the distribution system for the entire state of Nevada? And I think that really having real conversations and sending pricing signals will sort that out. And I think that in and of itself will be a motivation to do things like SNWA is doing at the Las Vegas Valley Water District with this massive covered parking, or what we're seeing at some of the resorts on the Strip with their rooftop solar programs and their storage programs. Storage, I think, is really good, what's going to drive a lot of this, and EVs are a type of storage and can shift the load as well.
Okay, a couple more questions. Is this change taking place having a positive or negative effect on the state's principal industry? What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Is this about the mining industry? No, I'm sorry.
I will weigh in on that as well. I'm sorry to monopolize this, but I see a lot of my friends from the state's principal industry out there in the crowd, and they are, as Commissioner Jones was talking about, they are one of the drivers for us to get to this place. And you know, there's been some controversy over question 3 and RPS and things like that on how they participate. But they are the biggest consumer of electricity, but they are also the biggest consumers that are demanding clean electricity.
All right, final question, and then we'll wrap this up. This event is billed as a clean energy and transportation summit. So far, I hear a lot about clean energy, but what about transportation? What can our state do to improve clean, public transportation options in our state. Anybody on the left side here, so to speak?
Sure. I mean, I think the RTC has been a leader in this sector. Obviously, didn't go down the path of some of the public transportation options that we wanted, but I think with the leadership of the legislature on electrified buses, as the governor mentioned, I think that we can make some substantial inroads there. We love our cars in Southern Nevada, though, and so we're going to have to find better ways to make some changes when it comes to complete streets, encourage people to get out of their cars, ride their bikes, walk, and do some major changes when it comes to mixed-use planning, so that people don't always have to get in their car to do anything.
All right, I'm going to give people a couple of minutes if they need to go to the restroom. You can thank me for that later, Tina, before the next panel starts. But to be serious, I give a lot of people a hard time, and Ann could have gone on all day about rulemaking, and
True.
I prevented that. But this, you really are lucky, and Tina did a great job assembling a panel of this high quality to talk about this subject. So I hope you'll give them all a round of applause. Thanks.